All right, guys. Happy Wednesday, everybody. If this rain keeps up here in New England, I'm going to have to be doing my show from a rowboat pretty soon. Actually, I got a two-person kayak in the garage. I think I'll pull it out later and get it ready. It's unbelievable. It's nonstop, man. It's freaking unbelievable. This is like last June. We had 6 weeks straight of rain. All of June and half of July. Actually, this month they said set a new record. The most rain in history. Well, I think the last time was the 18th century or something. Back in the 1700s, there was there was a little bit more. But this is the second worst in recorded New England history for rainfall in 1 month. It's unbelievable. Anyway, once again, the cards aren't playing in my favor. I kind of suspected this was going to be the case, though. This particular guest wasn't going to be an easy shot. It's Daniel Esgelin. He's now in Spain. And when I set up this interview, there was some question as to whether or not it was going to be a problem because the hotel he's at, he was concerned that he might have trouble making the international call from the hotel. This is, always a problem when you get overseas guests, so I anticipated there might be a problem. Anyway, I don't see him calling in, so I'll have to rebook him. Anyway, he was going to be talking about his book, Shadow Masters, dealing with how intelligence agencies and governments work together with international drug traffickers and terrorists for mutual benefit and profit. Oh, no, you say. They would never do that. Yeah, well, yes, again, that's all they ever do. That's all they've ever done. They don't just work with terrorists. They are terrorists. They don't just work with drug dealers. They are drug dealers. They only bust the low-level ones for good PR purposes, to make it look like they're actually fighting crime. But the reality is, well, I mean, come on, folks. Let's look at 50 years of FBI history is tainted with our good friend J. Edgar Hoover in bed with all the mafia crime bosses in New York and Chicago. The guy denied the existence of the mafia all during his tenure. Because, again, he was good friends with them. They had some little sweetheart deals that they struck up. It wasn't until after he died that the FBI finally acknowledged, the existence of the crime network and started, investigating them. But even at that, they only went after, certain individuals here and there to make it look like they were trying to, play the role of Batman. But, it's all just a facade. It's the public was outraged that nothing was being done to stop the mafia, so they had to do something, to make it look good on the surface. Look at the war on drugs began under Reagan. Just say no was Nancy's little slogan there. But as always, whenever the government sticks its fingers in something, the problem gets worse. It's just the illusion that they're doing something about it. But the problem heightens. Why? Because the government's behind the drug dealing, for the most part. All right, guys, short break. Stick with us. I'll go off onto another tangent. Obviously, my guest isn't going to be showing up today. Sorry about that. We'll be right back. All right, guys. Welcome back. I'm sure many of you have encountered this. Whenever you try to share with people what's going on in this twisted Orwellian world of ours, the first thing you hear is, oh, come on now, if that was happening, the media would have told us about it. One of the most important aspects of taking over a country, or in this case, the entire planet, is to hijack the media. Any tyrant knows and has known throughout all of history that in order to take over a country, in order to subjugate a people without arousing suspicion by its citizens, in that country you're trying to take over, or in this case, literally the whole planet, so that they don't know what's going on, you've got to gain control of all avenues of public information, not just the media, but education. I talked on a previous show about how the elites have hijacked education, and they certainly have done just that. So-called public education is a farce, has been for decades. That was done by mainly by the foundations, the Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford foundations, where they rob from the public treasury and then turn around and use that money to sabotage public education. It's incredible. We're paying for our own enslavement. Anyway, I've already documented how they've mucked with education, and today most of the it's already sabotaged, but it's never enough for them. They always want more and more, and then they're doing just that. Every year that goes by, they're screwing it up even more. Bush passed his No Child Left Behind Act. That's taken us even further down the rat's nest. But, that's not all they've done. Another important avenue of public information is, of course, the media. Well, how did they do that? That's what we're going to be talking about today, and this is why most people are in complete ignorance, because unfortunately they trust the monkeys in mainstream media. In fact, I would argue that hijacking the media is the most important thing, because most people get their information from, newspapers and television. In fact, more so from television than newspapers. Most people don't read. And that is, in fact, why you'll find a little bit more truth squeaking out in the printed press than you will on the TV, because they know that most people get their information from the TV, so that's where the most of the control is going to be. But that's the primary avenue, folks, through which they have deceived people and continue to keep them deceived, keep them in the dark. It's through the television media, also radio. But, again, there's a little more freedom there because not many people listen to the radio as much as watch TV. Anyway, what they're doing is taking advantage of mass psychology. They know that most people do and always have looked up to their leaders, and that's primarily the means through which the leaders communicate to the masses. That's why you always have White House briefings, on TV. They broadcast it nationally. What better way to reach people en masse? This is right out of Orwell's 1984. Remember when he showed people gathered around the video monitors? This is back when TV was first coming out. In fact, really hadn't even come out on a grand scale yet. It was still in the very early stages. But he knew that this was going to be used. That was the whole purpose of it. That's why it was invented. He knew it was going to be used to reach the masses. He didn't envision people having TVs necessarily in their individual homes, but he showed them, gathering at public facilities and watching the TV screens, or didn't call them TVs then, but, the video monitors, whatever. And we're at that point today, folks. It's not enough that everybody has a TV in their living room. Now, when you go to McDonald's, for example, or to the corner pub, you've got the big flat screen TV screen, so everybody can be watching the same thing. And most of the time when you go, or to your local donut shop or whatever, the TV is on either CNN or Fox or whatever. It's news broadcasts that they have the TV on. So you're getting constantly inundated and updated with the latest propaganda, no matter where you go. This is right out of, again, Orwell's 1984. He knew that the TV would be an important means, or, the video monitor would be an important means of advancing, government propaganda, keeping the public dumbed down. And that's just what we have. And then you couple that with the effects of psychotropic medications, benumbing people's minds so they can't think clearly, and you have the perfect recipe for a dumbed-down population, and that's what we have today. People are absolutely clueless. Not only are they clueless, but they don't even seem to care. On the occasion that you can get someone to listen to you when you're trying to open their eyes to what's happening, if they acknowledge that, oh, gee, that makes sense, yeah, it sounds like you're right, they'll brush it off. They'll walk away. Oh, yeah, no, I don't doubt what you're saying, but, I got my life to live, and I don't really want to be bothered with that stuff. It's unbelievable. So it's not enough just to wake people up. you gotta get them off their keisters and on their feet and active, to do something about it. No, that's an even bigger problem. People are so doped up and lethargic and apathetic that even armed with, knowledge of what's going on, they don't seem to be too concerned about it. It's unbelievable, folks. Our country is ripe for the picking. They're just all too willing and anxious to be pushed off the edge of the cliff, folks. Most Americans. Not all of them, but most of them, unfortunately. The good news about that, though, is, you don't have to have the majority awake. The Revolutionary War, and I'm not advocating war, but, unfortunately, it looks like ultimately that's where this is going to go, because nobody's taking action now while we can do it peacefully. But the Revolutionary War was fought by only 5% of the population. Only 5% actually actively took part in the Revolutionary War, and we thereby won our independence from Britain, or at least, on the surface we won our independence. You could argue that we're still under the crown today via the Rothschilds and their global enslavement plan, but you know what I mean. Only 5% actually took part. You don't need a large percentage of the population alert and active. So that is the good news. And I guarantee you we have more than 5% of the population aware of what's going on. I don't know the figures. There aren't any polls out there being done on this. You're not going to see CNN questioning people. Are you aware that the government is a fraud and it's lying to you and ripping you off and taking you for a ride and lying you into wars and staging fake terrorist attacks? No, there's no poll out there on that. Surely never will be, but I can guarantee you it's more than 5% who know what's going on. Especially in recent years, that number has magnified exponentially because of criminal negligent operations like the post-Katrina management by FEMA. That woke a lot of people up. The bailout woke a lot of people up. All right, guys, short break. We'll pick up with this when we get back. Stick with us. Okay, folks, welcome back. Talking about how the elites have hijacked our media, keep us dumbed down, so that we don't know the little shenanigans that they're pulling over on us. They're all too familiar with the age-old art of mass deception, which was best expressed by Hitler's chief of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. Here's what he said: "If you tell a big lie enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it." And that's where we're at. They've been telling the big lie long enough, often enough, and people have come to believe it. In fact, the bigger the lie, the better, because people are more prone to believe the bigger lie because they can't, comprehend that such a big lie would be told. No, that must be true. They wouldn't be so brazen as to tell such a big lie like that. They're more likely to, not trust a small lie. The big lie, they're more likely to believe, and that's what they do believe. I mean, look at the big lies they're telling us. 19 crazed Muslim hijackers overtook 4 planes and flew around for 2 hours without our military doing anything about it. Well, they wouldn't lie about that. They must have all just been simultaneously asleep that day. They wouldn't do something like Katrina. Oh, no, even though they have the actual technology and, all the pieces are in place for it, and they've admitted that they have the technology. They wouldn't use it for that purpose. No, they just invented it and have never actually used it. It's just sitting there dormant. On and on it goes. Anyway, along that line of what Goebbels said, listen to what our beloved George W. had to say. During a speech he gave on May 24th, 2005, while in Rochester, New York. Listen to what he said. "See, in my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda." You believe that little scumbag? He actually made that statement, folks. And, well, hey, at least he's, for a change, he's being honest about his lies. Repeat things over and over for the truth to sink in. Well, in Orwellian doublespeak, he's talking about lies there, of course. But then he went on to actually say, to catapult the propaganda. That's all that ever came out of his mouth, all that ever comes out of the mouths of our so-called elected officials, and their little whores in the media. Lies, propaganda, folks. You have to repeat it over and over, and don't they do just that? They repeat things to drill it into your head or just to distract your attention away. You know, they'll spend time over and over and over, day after day, like, you know, the Michael Jackson death and you know, his funeral and whatnot. That's all we saw on our TV screens for weeks on end. It's great distraction. You know, they love it. Anything to get your attention off of some major fiasco that's going on, where they're taking away your rights through some sleazy piece of legislation, the passing in a back room, or trying to get attention off of some scandal that broke, whatever. Go rent the movie Wag the Dog if you want to really see how our media works. That's an excellent film, by the way. Dustin Hoffman and I'm trying to remember who else starred in that now, but it's really well done. It came out in, 1998, I think it was. And it talks about how our media just totally lies to us through its rotten teeth over and over and over again. It's a great watch. It's actually all over the internet. You can watch it on YouTube or download it from BitTorrent, whatever. But check it out, folks. Wag the Dog. Excellent movie. To expose how the media lies, how it actually works. It's kind of like a behind-the-scenes view. Anyway, you know, under the guise of, you know, a fantasy, you know, fiction story. There's actually more truth in that fiction movie than what you get from the media. So anyway, it's worth a watch if you haven't seen it already. Anyway, as far as our media goes, here in the U.S., the reality of the situation is, and many of you already know this, but we're going to be documenting it today. ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, U.S. News and World Report, indeed all major avenues of our media are funded and controlled by the globalist boys, the same ones who have brought us the bailout. Big money. You know, it used to be back in, as of like 1980, I think it was, all of our major media were owned by 20 multinational corporations, headquartered mostly on Wall Street. Today, it's down to just six corporations owning our major media. In fact, actually, no, I think it's now down to 4, come to think of it. 4, you know, Warner Brothers, Disney. This is unbelievable, guys. When you have such a high concentration like that and the numbers continue to shrink, that ought to tell you something. Just a few people at the top pulling all the strings. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter. I'm sure many of you know this, but it's true. You know, you can flip through the channels some night when you're watching the evening news, and it doesn't matter whether it's ABC, CBS, NBC. They're all reporting the same stories, usually at the same time and with the exact same viewpoint. You want to talk about controlled media. You might as well be living under Stalinist Russia. In fact, you'd be better off under Stalinist Russia as far as the news goes, because at least people there knew they were being lied to. They knew the government was full of crap. They knew their media couldn't be trusted. But here, we're in a far worse predicament than people under Stalin, because people trust the flippin' media. They think it's telling them the truth. These people are paid very well to lie to you, folks. That's why they're paid so well. They continue to sell out their country and not care because their, you know, heinies are nice and padded and pampered and cushioned. Anyway, so not only are major media owned by the globalist trash that are destroying this country and, in fact, the whole planet for their profit and power, but nearly all U.S. journalists and reporters in the big media business today are members of either the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, or the Bilderbergers, which our politicians also belong to. So they're certainly not going to bite the hand that feeds them, not to mention the fact that most of them actually favor world government themselves. Walter Cronkite talked over and over about how America has to come to terms with the fact that it needs to give up its precious sovereignty and become part of an emerging world government. He was all for it. So it's, it's not even that they have to twist their arms anymore. It's like most of our congressmen. They don't have to twist their arms. They already favor it. Most of them, that's how they climb to the top rungs of the ladder, is they already swore allegiance to this system. Bill Clinton said it in an interview once. He said he realized very early on in his political career that if he wanted to climb to the top of the ladder, he needed to befriend those who really held the reins of power. And he was referring to big money. And so that's how he climbed to the top. He knew where the sources of power were, and so he attended parties where these scumbags were and rubbed shoulders and patted them on the back, and they turned around and patted him on the back. That's how he climbed to the top. That's how anybody who wants to climb to the top, any scum that wants to float to the top, that's what you got to do. You got to kissy-kissy with the trash bags that are pulling the strings behind the curtain. Anyway, the primary job of our media, folks, in case you haven't noticed, is to lie to us, not to tell us what's going on, but to make sure we don't know what's going on, and to make sure that wrong opinions are formulated in our minds as to what's unfolding before us. Keep us distracted. Anyway, another break coming in, folks. Stick with us. Pick up there when we get back. Okay, guys, welcome back. As I was saying before the break, the job of the media today is simply to lie to us, to cover up the crimes of big government and big business. But very often, the media doesn't even have to lie, and a lot of times it doesn't. All it does, most of the time actually, is just withhold the truth, which is far more effective because it's not as easily detected. It's a lot easier to tell when you're being told a lie than it is, to discern if simply the truth is being withheld. If you don't know what the truth is, you don't know if it's being withheld from you. And so more often than not, that's how the media, deceives the public. They simply don't tell us certain major, important, key pieces of information. For example, they reported what was going on 9/11. Yeah, the two towers were hit, the Pentagon was hit by something, and something crashed in Shanksville. They were reporting the events as they unfolded, but they weren't telling you, or at least they weren't focusing on, key pieces of information, like, there wasn't a plane found in Shanksville. There was no plane, some news media did mention that, CNN mentioned it, but they didn't focus on it enough. In fact, later they denied it and said, oh, of course a plane hit the building. There was pieces of debris all over the place, Jamie McIntyre said. When originally he said, wow, there's no evidence of a plane hitting here at all. There's no pieces of fuselage, engines, tail sections, wings, whatever. Anyway, I mentioned Walter Cronkite before. Notice what he wrote in his 1997 book, A Reporter's Life. He said, if we are to avoid catastrophe, a system of world order, preferably a system of world government, is mandatory. If we're to avoid catastrophe, these scumbags bring us nothing but catastrophe with their little Hegelian dialectic fraud. Anyway, he went on to say, the proud nations someday will yield up their precious sovereignty. The proud nations will yield up their precious sovereignty. Well, of course, he didn't really care because he knew that this wasn't going to happen in his pathetic lifetime. He knew he was going to be kicking off in a few years, which he did. And so he didn't care, He didn't care that he was selling out the world because he wasn't going to live to see it. You can bet your fat fanny that this didn't concern him. That he wasn't going to have to suffer under its oppression. Of course, being part of the elite wouldn't really matter anyway. He would be well cushioned. Of course, he would always have to worry, though, that the masses might find him out and search him out and take vengeance on him because he lied to them all during those years. But I think he realized it wasn't going to happen quite so fast, so he didn't have to worry. Anyway, but that's what they're doing, folks. All the big names in the big media, that's what they're doing. They're selling us out on a daily basis, whether they know it or not. You don't have to be a willful participant in a lie to be lying to people. That doesn't make you a liar, per se, but if you're pawning off lies, even if you're ignorant about it, you're still lying. You're still part of the problem, unfortunately. You can't be held accountable for that, but it doesn't matter. You know, they prefer, actually, that you be an ignoramus. Most aren't. Most people in the media actually do know what's going on and don't care. They're going to lie anyway because they favor it. They're part of the system. They love the fat income that they got coming in. But they prefer you not be aware so that you can add that aura of sincerity and not have to fake it. Some of them are so good at faking it, it doesn't matter. But it's better if you're not aware of it and you report your lying propaganda in the media with that aura of genuine sincerity. You know, it gives it a much better flavor. Unlike Glenn Beck, of course, who was caught off camera. Well, he was on camera, but, you know, behind in the backstage. I've mentioned this before. Some of you probably saw this. I'm sure it's still on YouTube. There was a video of him rubbing Vicks vapor rub on his eyes to induce tearing so that when he went on the air in a few minutes, it could look like he was all upset about, I don't even know what the issue was that he was going to be reporting on, but he wanted to give the impression that he was all upset over this and all teary-eyed, you know. Unbelievable. And, you know, as he's rubbing it on, his eyes are tearing, and he's asking people backstage, how does this look? Does this look good? And then he's acting like he's crying. Does this look convincing? And then they're all laughing, you know. What a joke. Disgusting bunch of pigs. That's all they are, folks. They know they're lying to you, most of them anyway. They know they're lying to you. And they love it because they're getting paid well to do it. They don't care. Mr. Bill O'Reilly, you think he cares? The $6 million a year? This is your $6 million man for you. The $6 million he's making a year. You think he gives a frog's fat fanny? His house is guarded. He takes nice exorbitant vacations at your expense, not just financially, but you know, by lying to you and selling out your country. Do you think he cares? No, he doesn't care. He's going to always be well protected in his multi-million-dollar mansion there, along with his other thugs in the business. Anyway, some high-profile media officials have admitted that withholding truth is not only something that they engage in, but that it is an absolute necessity. One such person was Reese Schoenfeld, a co-founder of CNN. On February 14th, 2005, while being interviewed on Fox's Your World with Neil Cavuto, listen to what he said. The government has the right and sometimes the duty to lie. The press must never lie, but has no duty to tell the truth. That's a kick in the head, huh? The press must never lie, but it has no duty to tell the truth. This whole idea that the public has a right to know. The public does not have a right to know, he says. The editor has a right to publish. That's what the First Amendment is about. The editor doesn't have to tell everything he knows, and God forbid that he ever should. So notice, he's not saying here that, you know, we're lying. Of course, they do lie all the time, but he's saying we're simply withholding the truth. The public doesn't need to know, and we don't need to tell them. So there you go, folks. There's a top founder of CNN coming right out and telling you that they're withholding truth from you. At best. You know, they of course lie too, but it doesn't matter. You withholding truth is just as odious as telling an outright lie, and has the same effect, keeping the public in ignorance. But here you go. You know, the Supreme Court in Florida ruled in that famous case over Monsanto there, and their bovine growth hormone BS. They actually ruled in favor of Fox, stating that the media is not obliged by law to tell the public the truth. So we have a Supreme Court ruling backing this up. And yet still people say, oh, what are you talking about? You're paranoid. The media doesn't lie. How could they get away with that? Because their bosses want it that way. That's how. I can't believe there's still people that just don't get it. They don't see what's going on. It's been going on for flipping decades. Anyway, well, you could argue it's been going on from day one, but not, you know, not on the scale that it is now. I mean, in the past several decades, it's gotten so bad. It's laughable, actually. For those that know what's going on, to watch the news, it's kind of entertaining. It's like Comedy Central. But it's not really a joke, folks. This is real serious stuff going on. It's a sick joke is what it is. But it's kind of laughable to watch these idiots. I mean, the lies are so phenomenally ridiculous. but yet people buy it. The gullible cattle out in the field chomping on their mutton. Just soaking it right up like a sponge. Fools. Anyway, the misinformation that permeates our media today is not always sold to us willingly by journalists and reporters. There are some, not many, that number shrinks every year, but there are some who work in the media today who know what is going on and do not like it. It's for this very reason that the globalists have devised a safety mechanism to ensure that their agenda is kept hidden. It's called job security. Notice what former Harvard business professor David C. Corton wrote along this line. You can get his book. It's very good reading. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Oh, boy. That's going back quite a few years. I'm surprised I didn't put that in my notes here. Anyway, if you just go to Google, or actually just go to Amazon.com and type in David Corton, K-O-R-T-E-N, you'll see his book come up. It's very good, exposing corporate crimes. But anyway, in this particular instance here, he's talking about the media and how controlled it is. He said millions of thoughtful, intelligent people who are properly suspicious of big government. Well, I'll tell you what, folks, we've got a break coming in. I'll look up that book over the break, too, and get that name for the book for you. Stick with us. Okay, guys, welcome back to Two-Thirds Radio. Yeah, the name of that book, I just looked it up on Amazon. It's When Corporations Rule the World, and I just noticed he's got several other books out. I'll have to check him out. He's got a good grasp of what's going on. The former Harvard business professor, David C. Corton, he mentions the Council on Foreign Relations, by the way, the Trilateral Commission as well, in that book. So he definitely knows what's going on with these Wall Street tycoon scoundrels. Anyway, here's what he says. Millions of thoughtful, intelligent people who are properly suspicious of big government are being deceived by the false information and distorted logic reported constantly in the corporate media. They are being won over to a political agenda that runs counter to both their values and their interests. Those who work within our major corporate, academic, political, governmental, and other institutions, including the media themselves, of course, find that they dare not speak out in opposition for fear of jeopardizing their jobs and their careers. Okay? Is a former Harvard professor telling you how it works. So, people who want to say, oh, you're paranoid, you're crazy. Well, you're going to have to tell this former Harvard business professor that he's paranoid and crazy, too. I don't just speak from my research and, interviewing others, who have gone through this, but I'm speaking from experience as well, folks, of being a former theology major. This is how big religion works. Just like big government, big business, big media. It's all the same. You play ball, you climb the ladder. You don't play ball, they push you off the ladder. And if you're still persistent, well, they have other means of shutting you up. Use your imagination. They certainly use theirs. Anyway, the truth is, folks, there are actually a good number of journalists in the mainstream media today who are completely oblivious to the whole globalist plot. Although such individuals are usually low on the totem pole, nevertheless, those in this category can remain in the newscasting business their entire lives, in fact, and retain complete ignorance of how things really work. This is because they never actually do their own investigative journalism anymore. This work is done for them by others. All they do is, read off of a script sheet that's handed to them, and they just assume that what they are reading is unbiased news. They don't know. It's like most teachers today. They're so weighted down with BS, like writing lesson plans. For every lesson that a teacher teaches, they have to hand in a freaking lesson plan, an outline. It has to contain this, that, and the other. It's very stringent. You got to have, behavioral objectives, whatever the hell that is. But, it's so time-consuming, they don't have any time. Should they desire to do some research, to bring additional information into the discussion in the class beyond what's in the dumbed-down textbooks, they don't have the time to do it because they're weighted down with all this other BS. And by the way, nobody ever even reads those flippin' lesson plans. They stick them in a file in a back room somewhere. Or they probably make paper airplanes and throw them at each other in the principal's office. Who knows? It's just to keep them busy so they don't have time to bring more information to the students. That's really what it is. They want them only to learn the crap that's in the textbooks to ensure that in case the Ritalin isn't doing the job enough and keeping them doped up, they want to make sure that the informational content in what they're learning is at the barest minimum. So freaking disgusting. Anyway, in the book Into the Buzzsaw, another good read, that came out in the summer of 2002, and even though it's upwards of, or just almost 8 years old now, the information in there is timeless. Very, very good read. It gives you another, like the movie Wag the Dog, it gives you a great behind-the-scenes look of how our media really works. It's written by, about a dozen or so former mainstream journalists that worked for big media, ABC, CBS, NBC, whatnot. And they quit. They quit their jobs. They left the mainstream media out of disgust. And they got together and wrote this book exposing, their experiences, what went on, how they were, forced to lie, how they weren't able to cover important stories that the public needed to know about, dealing with corruption and big government, big business. You're allowed to expose local or even state-level corruption, but as soon as you touch federal level, forget it. You're done. You learn very quick that you're either to shut your mouth or get out, or they'll push you down the bottom of a ravine, or put a few bullets in your head and say you committed suicide, like Gary Webb. Anyway, in this book, Christina Borgeson, who was the book's editor, and she also contributed a chapter, and I think she wrote the introduction to the book as well. She was an Emmy Award and Murrow Award-winning investigative reporter for CBS for years. She made this following statement in the introduction. She says, "The buzzsaw is a powerful system of censorship in this country that is revealed to those reporting on extremely sensitive stories, usually having to do with high-level government and or corporate malfeasance. It often has a fatal effect on one's career. I don't want to mix metaphors here, but a journalist that has been through the buzzsaw is usually described as radioactive, which is another word for unemployable. Once you're marked as a dissenter, as one who actually is doing the job that the public expects from them, not only will you get fired from your current position, but they'll blacklist you across the board so that you'll never get another job in mainstream media again. You'll have to go into the underground, go on Patriot Radio or something, but you'll never be on ABC, CBS, NBC, or any of the other big media outlets. You're done. You're finished. Later in this same book, Into the Buzzsaw, in a chapter that Borgeson contributed, she described in detail, speaking from her personal experience, what it's actually like to go through the buzzsaw. And here's what she had to say. "The buzzsaw is what can rip through you when you try to investigate or expose anything this country's large institutions, be they corporate or government, want kept under wraps. The system fights back with official lies, disinformation, and stonewalling." Listen to this, folks. Your car is broken into, and the thief takes your computer and your reporter's notebook and leaves everything else behind. You feel like you're being followed everywhere you go. The sense of fear and paranoia is, at times, overwhelming. Walk into the buzzsaw, and you'll cut right to this layer of reality. You will feel a deep sense of loss and betrayal, a shocking shift in paradigm. Anyone who hasn't experienced it will call you crazy. Those who don't know the truth or are covering it up will call you a conspiracy nut. Well, there you go. And, you know, in this book, they're not even necessarily talking about the conspiracy for world government or, you know, 9/11 being an inside job. They're not talking about the fraudulence of the Federal Reserve or the income tax system. No, they're just telling their personal experience. They might not necessarily know the whole picture and how deep this rat hole goes, but they're telling you, hey, the media is a fraud. You're being lied to. We weren't able to tell you the truth on this particular issue or that particular issue. You know, one of the chapters is dedicated to this story about Fox News suppressing the Monsanto thing with the bovine growth hormone, how it causes cancer, and how this country is the only one that is still using this, whereas all European countries have banned the crap. And this is the case, again, over which the Florida Supreme Court stated the media doesn't have to tell us the truth and not obliged by law to do so. That story is, amongst many other important stories, is in that book. There's a great story about Flight 800, TWA. I got a show coming up on that sometime. What a fraud that was and the cover-up involved with that. The FBI at the helm of the whole thing. Not investigating it, but blocking an investigation while claiming to be conducting an investigation. Oh, dear God. But please understand, you're listening to the words, you just heard the words, of a former Emmy and Murrow award-winning journalist who worked for CBS. It's not some paranoid conspiracy theorist talking there, folks. She's been there. She's seen how it works. Okay, guys, be right back. I hope you realize you're living in Soviet Russia today, folks, as far as the media goes. Stick with us. Be right back. All right, guys. The second hour here, and I'm not even a third through these notes, so maybe I'll have to pick this up tomorrow. I'm not sure. Anyway, let's move on to another interesting quote here along this line. This is from MIT professor Noam Chomsky in his book Necessary Illusions. This guy, for the most part, is just a shill, a thug. Interviewed him once, and the guy's a joke. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's written some good books, and there's good information in them. He's great for exposing Cold War fiascos, you know, the Israeli mistreatment of the Palestinians. He's good for, you know, talking about the media and their lies, like the quote I'm going to read in a minute here. You know, he's great for that stuff. There's some solid, good information there. But then he'll turn around and say, oh, that's ridiculous. 9/11 done by the government. Come on now. When in reality, his books are all about that type of thing. Exposing government lies and how they, you know, connive us into fighting phony wars for them. You know, he admits they did it with Korea and Vietnam and a whole bunch of other wars that we fought during the Cold War. He admits all that, but somehow, oh no, 9/11 wasn't an inside job. What a joke. The guy's a maroon. Anyway, but here's a good statement he made in his book, Necessary Illusions. Very true. He said, in short, the major media, particularly the elite media, set the agenda that others generally follow. It would hardly come as a surprise if the picture of the world that they present were to reflect their perspectives and interests. Concentration of ownership of the media is high and increasing. Yeah, absolutely. And so naturally you're going to see their interest being served. You know, you got, I think I actually mentioned this later in my notes, but you got NBC, for example, owned by GE, the biggest Pentagon, one of the biggest Pentagon contractors. Naturally, they're not going to tell you that we fight wars for fictitious reasons and that the government's lying us into this and that war with phony claims like, you know, WMDs, yellow cake, whatever. Anyway, you would think that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, would intervene to prevent such high concentration of ownership of our media, right? Well, wrong. On the contrary, this federal bureaucracy has fought to keep this disturbing fact from the public. This point, folks, was brought to light by MSNBC on September 14, 2006, when it reported, and I quote, the Federal Communications Commission ordered its staff to destroy all copies of a draft study that suggested greater concentration of media ownership would hurt local TV news coverage. Adam Kandub, now a law professor at Michigan State University, said senior managers at the agency ordered that, quote, every last piece of the report be destroyed. The whole project was just stopped. End of discussion, he said. There you go. There's the FCC hard at work for you to make sure that the media is doing its job, keeping you informed of the latest propaganda. Unbelievable. And so many people think that it's there to do the opposite. Oh, welcome to fairyland, boys and girls. All right, guys, another short break. Be right back.
Just click your heels together and say, there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Oh, are we living in a fairy tale land or what? Unbelievable, folks. Almost the entire country turns on their boob tube every night and just sucks it right up, thinking that they're being informed. Oh, they'd never lie to us. That's all it is lies. Let's look at some of the board member interlocks that exist between big media and big business. This will tell you a lot about who's really pulling the strings in our big media today. The New York Times interlocks with the Carlyle Group, Eli Lilly, Ford, Johnson, and Johnson, Hallmark, Staples, Pepsi, and, Johnson and Johnson. I'm not reading that right. Eli Lilly, Ford, Johnson & Johnson, Hallmark, Staples, Pepsi, and Lehman Brothers. Of course, Carlyle Group, folks, owns United Defense, so there's your Pentagon interlock with the New York Times. Naturally, they're not going to tell you how fraudulent the wars are that we fight. The Washington Post interlocks with Lockheed Martin. There you go. Another Pentagon contractor there. Coca-Cola, Dun and Bradstreet, Gillette, GE, another Pentagon contractor, which also owns NBC, JP Morgan, and Moody's. The Chicago Times and the LA Times interlocked with 3M, Allstate, let's see, Caterpillar, ConocoPhillips, Kraft, McDonald's, Pepsi, Quaker Oats, Schering Plow, and Wells Fargo. News Corp, which is Fox, interlocks with the British Airways and the Rothschild Investments. GE, NBC, interlocks with Anheuser-Busch, Avon, Bechtel, another Pentagon contractor for you, Chevron, Texaco, Coca-Cola, Dell, GM, Home Depot, Kellogg, JP Morgan, Microsoft, Motorola, and Procter & Gamble. Notice how some of these names pop up over and over because they're all interconnected, folks. They all have mutual interests that are being served by the media that they own and control. Disney, or ABC, interlocks with Boeing, talk about a Pentagon contracting company, Northwest Airlines, Clorox, Estee Lauder, FedEx, Gillette, Halliburton, Kmart, Staples, Yahoo, and McKesson. Then you got Viacom, or CBS, which interlocks with American Express, Consolidated Edison, Oracle, and Lafarge North America. That's not Oracle Broadcasting, of course. AOL Time Warner, or CNN, interlocks with Citigroup, Estee Lauder again, Colgate, Palmolive, and Hilton. Man, oh man, it goes on and on. There's no end to this. My point here is, folks, simply to draw our attention to these happy little friendships that have emerged and the threats that they pose to we the people. For example, the above list contains the names of several major Pentagon contracting companies, as I pointed out. This should help you understand why we're not told about how we're lied into wars. They brought out Iraq only because you can't avoid it. It's in your face. It's been all over the place. Everybody knows it. But they still cover it up by saying, well, it's a good thing we went in there after all. It's a good thing we removed Saddam. He was a tyrant, and, on and on and on. So they're still whitewashing the whole thing, and the fact that it was a lie isn't such a big deal after all. But, they're not going to tell you that the whole pretext for the two wars that we were sucked into under Bush was a fraud. They're not going to tell you about 9/11. They're not going to tell you that the Afghan war is a lie as well, and that they were planning that years in advance. Anyway, here's another quote from Chomsky's Necessary Illusions. He says, journalists entering the system are unlikely to make their way unless they conform to these ideological pressures that are put on them from the highest levels in the totem pole. Generally, by internalizing the values, it is not easy to say one thing and believe another, and those who fail to conform will tend to be weeded out by familiar mechanisms. So much for freedom of the press, folks. Weeded out by familiar mechanisms. Yeah. What do you think that means? Either getting fired or fired at. Anyway, in addition to lying and withholding truth, the media also manufacture and manipulate the general public's thoughts, opinions, and values. As we read from the pages of Edward Benet's book, Propaganda, which came out, 1929. Here's an interesting statement he made in his book. Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind and who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. To deplore the existence of such a mechanism is to ask for a society such as never was and never will be. To admit that it exists but expect that it shall not be used is unreasonable. This is way back in the 1920s, folks. How much more so is that the case today? Ben H. Bagdikian, Dean Emeritus of the Graduate School of Journalism at the University of California at Berkeley, made this statement: power over the American media is flowing to the top with devouring speed. The country's most widespread news, commentary, and daily entertainment are controlled by the world's largest corporations. The controlling handful of American and foreign corporations now exceed in their size and communications power anything the world has seen before. Their intricate global interlocks create the force of an international cartel. Exactly what it is. There's another paragraph in that quote, but I'll wait to read that after the break, folks. Stick with us. All right, folks. I'm going to finish up this quote here from David Bagdikian. He says, there are pernicious consequences. While excessive bigness itself is cause for economic anxieties, the worst problems are political and social. The country's largest media giants have achieved alarming success in writing the media laws and regulations in favor of their own corporations and against the interests of the general public. Well, isn't that always how it goes? So, it's always big money that writes the laws. You know, back in 1917, one of my favorite examples, the Trading with the Enemy Act was written by military contractors. It actually states that, this law prohibits U.S. corporations from trading with belligerent nations toward the United States, except those that have special concessions from the president. So it was designed to ensure that they could continue trading with enemy nations, but only certain companies, the big ones, the big multinationals. They didn't want competition from smaller companies muscling in on their turf. That's all the law was designed to do, was to ensure their monopolies and crush out smaller competitors. It was not designed to stop this evil practice at all. And so it's been with almost every single piece of legislation that has ever come down the pike, especially in the past 100 years or so of this country's history. The laws are only, designed to give the illusion of providing benefit to the general public. But in the actual text, if you take the time to read it, you'll see that's not the case at all. Very opposite is the case. Anyway, he finishes off the quote by saying this: their concentrated power permits them to become a larger factor than ever before in socializing each generation with entertainment models of behavior and personal values. Being manipulated all the time, and most people don't even know it. Their values are being changed, being manipulated, as well as, dumbing them down and keeping them ignorant of what's going on. They're also changing the way you view the world. There's been tremendous amount of change in public sentiments about a whole lot of things in just the past 20 years. Tremendous shifts. I brought this one out on a previous broadcast. I'll mention it again just for an example. Look at how the public view of homosexuality has changed in the past, 20 years or so. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. I'm not for gay bashing by any means, I don't have a problem with gay people at all. I'm not a fan of homosexuality, but I don't have any problem with homosexuals. You understand what I'm saying? But the point is, how did we go from this, gay bashing one minute, and the next minute now, you'll be bashed if you ever insult a gay person? How does that happen? It happens because of the media. I hate to say it, but it's true. If the media started glorifying gay bashing again, you bet your bottom dollar, folks, within, a year or two, that's going to become the popular thing. Probably a year or two, never mind, probably a couple of weeks. It doesn't take long for the public mindset to completely change, completely reverse direction because of the manipulation that goes on. And it's not that they come out and say, okay, we want everybody now to gay bash. No, they just glorify it in the media, in the movies, mostly. People are influenced even more by movies than what's in the news. But you understand what I'm saying? In a short time, they start portraying, they'll put it in a comedy movie. Ha ha, wasn't that funny? They're beating up that gay guy, But when it's glorified, people tend to emulate it. They don't just tend to do it, they do it. And they know this. This is how they manipulate public opinion. It so happens that, they've been manipulating people against that kind of thing. And again, that's good. That's a good thing. But their reason for doing it isn't out of the goodness of their heart because they don't want to see gay people beat up. That's not why they're doing it. They're doing it for several twisted reasons that aren't in the interest of the general public or in the interest of gay people either. They're doing it, one of the reasons they're doing it is for population control purposes. Homosexuals can't procreate, and they're all about that. They want to, reduce the population, bring down population growth, and that's one of the reasons they do it. They also do it because, AIDS spreads quite heavily in the gay population. So the more gay people, the chances are AIDS will spread more quickly, and they want that. They want to reduce the population, not just stop population growth or minimize it. Anyway, so you can see how the media has a powerful influence on the public mindset, people's views, people's aspirations, their opinions, on and on it goes, and it's absolutely frightening. They can take a demon like George Bush and make him look like a hero. Or they can take a hero and make him look like a demon. Nixon actually pointed that out. Back in 1980, he wrote a book, and he stated that, the power of the media in the country today is frightening, he said. They can demonize you or make you a hero regardless what kind of person you are. And it's frightening that the public follows along with this. Anyway, In a similar vein of thought, along with the Bagdickian quote I just read, here's what author Benjamin Ginsberg had to say in his book, The Captive Public. He wrote, Western governments have used market mechanisms to regulate popular perspectives and sentiments. The marketplace of ideas effectively disseminates the beliefs and ideas of the upper classes while subverting the ideological and cultural independence of the lower classes. This is just what Noam Chomsky said in a quote I read a minute ago. They get you to conform to certain ideologies when you work in the big media, and if you don't, they will remove you through familiar mechanisms. Anyway, he goes on. Ginsberg continues. Through the construction of this marketplace, Western governments forged firm and enduring links between socioeconomic position and ideological power, permitting upper classes to use each to buttress the other. In the United States, in particular, the ability of the upper and upper middle classes to dominate the marketplace of ideas has generally allowed these strata to shape the entire society's perception of political reality and the range of realistic political and social possibilities. For example, folks, just look how a previously unknown figure in the political world becomes popular overnight. Nobody heard of Obama, until the last election. Nobody, he was not a household name. How about Jimmy Carter? I always marveled at that one. Who the heck knew Jimmy Carter, a peanut farmer? All of a sudden overnight, everybody knows him, and, we need to vote for him. Why? Well, because he's popular in the media, that's why. Not because he's done anything, not because he's had any experience in politics, he certainly didn't. The man became president. Why did he become president? Well, not just because of the manipulation of the media, but even more importantly, prior to that, he befriended David Rockefeller and became a member of his little trilateral commission. That's why. And because Zbigniew Brzezinski pushed him, just like Brzezinski pushed Obama. Anyway, continuing with this quote, while Westerners usually equate the marketplace with freedom of opinion, the hidden hand of the market can be almost as potent an instrument of control as the iron fist of the state. And what better way to win the masses over but to deceive them into accepting things that are against their interests through propaganda? You don't need a bullet or a tank or a sword, folks. You can conquer people just by lying to them, and that's exactly what they do. All right, folks. Back to Truth Hurts. All right, let's take a look at a quote from Ramsey Clark. I believe he's still alive, actually. I'll have to see if I can get him on sometime. He's an interesting guy, former U.S. Attorney General under scumbag LBJ. But he's actually a pretty decent man. Ramsey Clark, that is, not LBJ. Maybe I'll have LBJ on sometime. I'll summon his spirit with a Ouija board and, anyway. What a scum of the earth. Yeah, I'd like to have him on. Or his ghost. Whatever. Rip him wide open. What a loser. Anyway, let's see what Ramsey Clark had to say about the media and those who control it. We are a plutocracy. We ought to face it. A country in which wealth controls. Very true. That may be true of all countries, but it's uniquely true of ours because our nationalism and concentration of wealth here is particularly high. Even our democratic processes are hardly that because money dominates politics, and we know it. Through politics, it dominates government, and it dominates the media. We really need desperately to find new ways to hear independent voices and points of view. It's the only way we're going to find the truth. And that's why we have things like Oracle Broadcasting, folks. It's the only way you're going to find the truth. You're not going to get it from the mainstream media. It is, in fact, all controlled. And it's high time this country wakes up to that fact. You know, we pride ourselves in thinking we're so much better off than the poorest people that lived under Stalin, that lived under Mao and, Hitler. And folks, let me tell you, propaganda we have in this country is far more deadly than what they had because it's so subtle. Well, it actually isn't for those who know what's going on. It's very obvious and blatant and in your face. But for those that don't know, it's very subtle. You know, we don't have open tyranny in this country. We do have tyranny, but again, it's subtle. It's unless you've been a direct victim of it, you don't see it. You know, you don't have the tanks like at Tiananmen Square rolling down the streets, at least not yet anyway. Stick around. If they have their way, that's going to happen soon. But you don't have it right now, so people don't realize that we have a tyrannical system in place. As long as you shut your mouth and are, playing the ball game, you're just not going to see it unless you're looking for it. But if you don't even know it's there, you won't be looking for it. Why would you look for a lost coin that fell out of your pocket if you don't even know you had the coin in there in the first place? That's the condition America's in right now. They don't even know they're missing a coin because they didn't know they had it. It's a mess. It's one big mess. Anyway, there's been many books written over the years, folks, that talk about how, there's a pervasive bias in the media enforced at the highest levels of corporate control of the major journals and news reporting agencies across the country. And while there's no question that this bias does indeed exist, it's often misidentified and thus mislabeled. So let's call it by its proper name, globalist. That is the bias. To destroy American sovereignty and prep people's minds for acceptance of a world system of government. It's a bias that frowns upon loyalties to the Constitution and traditional American values, while favoring all ideologies opposed thereto. A bias that serves to advance the cause of the very powerful and wealthy globalist elites. And they confuse you with the left-right paradigm swing game. When a Democrat's in office, they'll talk about the liberal bias, and, when a Republican is in office, they'll talk about the right-wing bias in the media. It's unbelievable. It's a game. It's a fraud. There is a bias, but it's not left. It's not right. It's globalist. They're the ones who are controlling everything, keeping you distracted by the little bouncing ball so you never realize what exactly is going on, and that all your politicians, well, pretty much all of them, are all part of this little club. They're all lying to you. And so all you're given is the illusion of a difference between the two parties. Under a Republican administration, you'll get fascism. Under a Democratic administration, like now, you get socialism and communism. But there's really no difference, folks, because it's the same scum at the top who are pulling all the strings. It's still tyranny. It's still totalitarianism. So you can call it fascism or communism, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's still the same game. You're still going to get ripped off. Your dollar's going to devaluate. Your debt's going to go up. Your jobs are going to be lost. You're going to lose more of your homes. Your rights are going to go out the window. They just come at it from seemingly different angles, but it's all the same crap. The same people at the top pulling the strings. When is this country going to snap out of it and see this for what it is? Back in 1992, CBS correspondent Bernard Goldberg, who years later authored a book called Bias, a CBS insider exposes how the media distort the news, stated that, quote, "We in the press like to say we're honest brokers of information, and it's just not true. The press does have an agenda." So, what more can be said here? When you're quoting from the horse's mouth, so to speak, when you're quoting from people who have worked at high levels in the corporate media, they, when they themselves, and notice these people always say this after they leave, of course. They're not going to say it while they're still working for them. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter. When you see that statements like this are being made, by high-level individuals in the corporate media, or who were in the corporate media. You know, come on. That should tell you something. These aren't, conspiracy nuts. These are people who have worked there behind the scenes and saw firsthand what's going on. They're telling you the press has an agenda. And again, he said, we, the press, like to say we're honest brokers of information, and it's just not true. They're not honest. They're not able to be honest, even if they wanted to be. They can't. Now can you see why the media haven't been ringing the warning bell about what's been really going on in our government, folks, for decades on end now? Their job, once again, is not to reveal, but to conceal the true nature of politics and economics. As author Thomas A. Lane wrote, and I quote, the real political process is hidden from the public view by a concert of news media which conceals the true sources of political power. Regarding the particular obvious degree of media control exerted by the Bush administration in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, perhaps no one has made statements more revealing than the following ones by Dan Rather while being interviewed on the BBC's Newsnight on May 16, 2002. This was very, very interesting. You're going to want to pay attention closely to this quote, folks. I must say, though Dan Rather for decades had actually served the interests of the elite and had partaken in, the lies that we were told quite a few himself, right from the very start, in the beginning of his career. He started off by covering up the Kennedy assassination. He said, obviously the president was shot from the rear. You could see him plump forward in the Zapruder film. He wasn't bargaining on the fact that the Zapruder film was going to be released to the public years later by Jim Garrison. It was being held in the Time Life building in New York. He subpoenaed the thing. And when it was revealed, whoops, it was found out that Mr. Rather was lying. He doesn't flump forward. He flumps backward because he was shot from the front. Dan Rather was lying through his rotten teeth. But anyway, nevertheless, Dan Rather in this BBC interview was speaking very openly. Now, of course, it was a foreign news broadcast, naturally. You wouldn't see him speak so openly here, in the American media. But nevertheless, it appears as though the man in his senior years now is trying to make amends for his years of lies. Perhaps he has a bit of a conscience, and now he wants to rectify some of what he's done. But no, listen to what he says. This was astonishing. My jaw dropped when I heard this interview. He said, the belief runs so strong in both the political and military leadership of the current war effort, referring to the Afghan war, that those who control the images will control public opinion. And we got a break coming in. I don't want to break up this quote. It's really good stuff. You want to hear it in its entirety altogether. So stick back, and I'll pick up there when we get back, folks. All right, folks. We're already in our last segment here. Wow. Time has flown by. Obviously, I'll be picking this topic up tomorrow. There's a lot more to cover here. So I'll finish this up, and at this time I'll go on to something else. But I don't have any guests planned for tomorrow or Friday. Of course, it doesn't seem to matter because they never show up these days. But anyway, I hope you enjoy the shows anyway, regardless when my guests show up. Let me read this quote here, and I'm going to start from the beginning again just to get the whole thing in perspective. This was an amazing statement by Dan Rather. Listen to what he said. The belief runs so strong in both the political and military leadership of the current war effort, the Afghan war, that those who control the images will control public opinion. They realize what an entertainment-oriented society ours has become. Therefore, they would say to themselves, hey, we've had the Hollywoodization of the news. We've had the Hollywoodization of almost everything else in society. Why not the Hollywoodization of the war? And I want to say quietly, but as forcefully as I can, that I hope this doesn't go any further. It has gone too far already. I am appalled by it. I do think it is an outrage. This is a personal opinion. Imagine that, folks. He was saying this with a stern face, talking calm but firmly. He meant what he said. He said, this is an outrage. Basically, I'm disgusted with it, and I hope it stops. That they're making a circus out of this war. He went on to say, what's going on is a belief that the public doesn't need to know. The belief that there does not have to be a high degree of communicable trust between the leadership and the led. We've read this same idea from many other quotes, many other sources this morning. He went on to say, limiting access, limiting information to cover the backsides of those who are in charge of the war is extremely dangerous and cannot and should not be accepted. And I am sorry to say that up to and including the moment of this interview, that overwhelmingly it has been accepted by the American people. And the current administration of Bush Jr. revels in that. They relish that, and they take refuge in that. Quite an astonishing series of statements. And some would say, oh, come on, he's a shill, he's just saying that. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. These statements are mind-blowing. You've never heard anything like this come from a mainstream American journalist, and he certainly is mainstream. He finished off by saying this. It is an obscene comparison. I am not sure I like it, but, there was a time in South Africa that people would put flaming tires around people's necks if they dissented. And in some ways, the fear is that you will be necklaced here. You will have a flaming tire of lack of patriotism around your neck. If you should speak out and not go along with the program, metaphorically, they're going to put this flaming tire around your neck too, like they did in South Africa, is his point. Then he goes on to say, now it is that fear that keeps journalists from asking the toughest of the tough questions and to continue to bore in on the tough questions so often. And I am humbled to say, I do not accept myself from this criticism. Isn't that interesting? Very interesting indeed. He was admitting here that he himself is guilty of this, that he has not been honing in on the tough questions. And it's obvious why. He's not allowed to. He's saying here that he wanted to, but he hasn't been able to, and he's guilty of doing this same thing. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't see this as a shill here. I think he was speaking very honestly. Not only would he not have been allowed to talk like this on American television, but I think he feared perhaps his life that he couldn't. That's the only reason he was talking on a foreign broadcast like this. Because A, they would air it, and he wouldn't have to be so afraid as he would here. Pretty interesting. I do think the man was speaking genuinely. Go look it up yourself. It's all over the internet. You can watch the video. You can look at the expressions on his face. I do think he was speaking sincere there. I think he was disgusted with what was going on. And that's just a few excerpts from the interview. He went on to say a lot more, but, just how fed up he was. And many other journalists, he said, were fed up, that there was a total tight lid being put on what was coming out of Afghanistan, what they were being allowed to report, and how the public was being kept in the dark. And he said that's very dangerous for our, quote, democracy, whatever. Anyway, how did the globalist conspirators first begin to gain significant control of our media? That's the next question. It's obvious they control it now, but how did this whole thing start? Well, folks, back in 1917, and by the way, they were controlling our media even before that, but it really whipped into high gear about that time. This was the era of World War I. They needed to keep things under wraps. And one of the key players, of course, was Walter Lippmann, who spread propaganda about the German people right after, or the German government, right after the staged, 2 years earlier this started, actually, with the staged sinking of the Lusitania. It was set up to be targeted. They wanted that to happen. They were hoping that immediately they were going to be able to fool the American people into joining the war, but it didn't work that way. It took, 2 years of constant propaganda headed up by Walter Lippmann. But they realized that, they needed to consolidate control of the media in 1917. And so that's what happened. Congressman Oscar Callaway made this revealing statement before Congress back in 1917. Here's what he said. In March 1915, the J.P. Morgan interests got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the U.S. and a sufficient number of them to control generally the policy of the daily press of the United States. These 12 men worked the problem out by selecting 179 newspapers and then began by an elimination process to retain only those necessary for the purpose of controlling. They found it was necessary to purchase control of 25 of the greatest papers. The 25 papers were agreed upon. Emissaries were sent to purchase the policy, national and international, of these papers, and agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers. This policy also included the suppression of everything in opposition to the wishes of the interests served. So there you go. In a nutshell, he's explaining what happened, how they did it. They started out by buying these 25 major papers around the country, and then later adding more to their repertoire until finally they got control of the whole system. But, by gaining control of the 25 major papers, that was vital because, the other smaller papers tended to follow in tandem what was reported in the big ones. So once you got control of the big ones, tremendous pressure was put on you to conform to their opinions, but a lot of times you didn't even have to apply pressure because it was just the popular thing to do to tout the views and opinions expressed in the big papers. It was a very smart yet, deadly move on their part, deadly for the interests of, the general public. But these scoundrels are very crafty. They're very smart. They know what they're doing, folks. And it's proved, unfortunately, very effective. And, of course, the same thing was done with the television media. They were right there from the beginning when television was created to make sure that they had that whole avenue hijacked right from the start. It was these same big business interests that were running the printed press for decades that were right there. They had the money already at their disposal that they raped and pillaged from the public. And they used it to create, ABC, NBC, on and on, to make sure that right from the start, all that people would be hearing in these mass media avenues was their propaganda. So it's been that way from day one, folks, since the TV was first invented. All we've gotten, and it's gotten worse over the years, but from the start, that's all we've gotten was propaganda. You think they were going to let an avenue like this go untouched? You think they weren't going to exploit this? You better believe it. I'll argue that, the TV was invented for that purpose and propagated for that purpose. Yeah, what a great way to reach people right in their own living room. All right, folks, I'll pick up there tomorrow, finish this up, and perhaps go on to something problem. Anyway, I don't see him calling in, so I'll have to rebook him. Anyway, he was going to be talking about his book, Shadow Masters, dealing with how intelligence agencies and governments work together with international drug traffickers and terrorists for mutual benefit and profit. Oh, no, you say. They would never do that. Yeah, well, yes, again, that's all they ever do. That's all they've ever done. They don't just work with terrorists. They are terrorists. They don't just work with drug dealers. They are drug dealers. They only bust the low-level ones for good PR purposes to make it look like they're actually fighting crime. But the reality is, well, I mean, come on, folks. Let's look at 50 years of FBI history is tainted with our good friend J. Edgar Hoover in bed with all the mafia crime bosses in New York and Chicago. The guy denied the existence of the mafia all during his tenure because, again, he was good friends with them. They had some little sweetheart deals that they struck up. It wasn't until after he died that the FBI finally acknowledged, the existence of the crime network and started, investigating him. But even at that, They only went after, certain individuals here and there to make it look like they were trying to, play the role of Batman. But, it's all just a facade. Did on a previous show about how the elites have hijacked education, and they certainly have done just that. So-called public education is a farce, has been for decades. That was done by mainly by the foundations, the Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford foundations, where they rob from the public treasury and then turn around and use that money to sabotage public education. It's incredible. We're paying for our own enslavement. Anyway, I've already documented how they've mucked with education, and today most of the it's already sabotaged, but it's never enough for them. They always want more and more, and then they're doing just that. Every year that goes by, they're screwing it up even more. Bush passed his No Child Left Behind Act. That's taken us even further down the rat's nest. But, that's not all they've done. Another important avenue of public information is, of course, the media. Well, how did they do that? That's what we're going to be talking about today, and this is why most people are in complete ignorance, because unfortunately they trust the monkeys in mainstream media. In fact, I would argue that hijacking the media is the most important thing, because most people get their information from, newspapers and television. In fact, more so from television than newspapers. Most people don't read. And that is, in fact, why you'll find a little bit more truth squeaking out in the printed press than you will on the TV, because they know that most people get their information from the TV, so that's where the most of the control is going to be. But that's the primary avenue, folks, through which they have deceived people and continue to keep them deceived, keep them in the dark. It's through the television media, also radio. But, again, there's a little more freedom there because not many people listen to the radio as much as watch TV. Anyway, what they're doing is taking advantage of mass psychology. They know that most people do and always have looked up to their leaders, and that's primarily the means through which the leaders communicate to the masses. That's why you always have White House briefings, on TV. They broadcast it nationally. What better way to reach people en masse? This is right out of Orwell's 1984. Remember when he showed people gathered around the video monitors? This is back when TV was first coming out. In fact, really hadn't even come out on a grand scale yet. It was still in the very early stages. But he knew that this was going to be used. That was the whole purpose of it. That's why it was invented. He knew it was going to be used to reach the masses. He didn't envision people having TVs necessarily in their individual homes, but he showed them, gathering at public facilities and watching the public was outraged that nothing was being done to stop the mafia, so they had to do something, to make it look good on the surface. Look at the war on drugs began under Reagan. Just say no. It was Nancy's little slogan there. But as always, whenever the government sticks its fingers in something, the problem gets worse. It's just the illusion that they're doing something about it. But the problem heightens. Why? Because the government's behind the drug dealing, for the most part. All right, guys, short break. Stick with us. I'll go off onto another tangent. Obviously, my guest isn't going to be showing up today. Sorry about that. We'll be right back. All right, guys. Welcome back. I'm sure many of you have encountered this. Whenever you try to share with people what's going on in this twisted Orwellian world of ours, the first thing you hear is, "Oh, come on now. If that was happening, the media would have told us about it." One of the most important aspects of taking over a country, or in this case, the entire planet, is to hijack the media. Any tyrant knows and has known throughout all of history that in order to take over a country, in order to subjugate a people, without arousing suspicion by its citizens, in that country you're trying to take over, or in this case, literally the whole planet, so that they don't know what's going on. You've got to gain control of all avenues of public information, not just the media, but education. I talked. All right, guys. Happy Wednesday, everybody. If this rain keeps up here in New England, I'm going to have to be doing my show from a rowboat pretty soon. Actually, I got a 2-person kayak in the garage. I think I'll pull it out later and get it ready. It's unbelievable. It's nonstop, man. It's freaking unbelievable. This is like last June. We had 6 weeks straight of rain. All of June and half of July. Actually, this month they said set a new record. The most rain in history. Well, I think the last time was the 18th century or something. Back in the 1700s, there was a little bit more. But this is the second worst in recorded New England history for rainfall in 1 month. It's unbelievable. Anyway, once again, the cards aren't playing in my favor. I kind of suspected this was going to be the case, though. This particular guest wasn't going to be an easy shot. It's Daniel Esgelin. He's now in Spain. And when I set up this interview, there was some question as to whether or not it was going to be a problem because the hotel he's at, he was concerned that he might have trouble making the international call from the hotel. This is, always a problem when you get overseas guests, so I anticipated there might be a